Wherever you are, what day it is. Dunlop tonight, a nice little backing game with our Diane Fowler, our controller. Always good to be friends with people on the finance team and the controller. She is writing the Zamboni tonight. You're going to be on the extras. You're going to be at the Kraken game now. I said, no. She says, I'm writing the Zamboni. I was like, what? And yeah, so she's going to be sitting back there kind of waving as the Zamboni goes around tonight at the Kraken game. Diane Froward, if you see her, and she's got great tickets in the Tunnel Club seats. I was maybe going to go on TickPick to see if I can get a ticket tonight, but we'll see how that goes. This is so cool because occasionally we have a guest on Juan on Rainier, and of course this is your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio World, where we raise awareness on a variety of different issues here in the south side of Seattle, where I have resided for so many years. And a lot going on on the south side in District 2, as my text messages in my Facebook page blew up last week. And fortunately for me, I live in District 3. Sarasota was very, very relieved that we are in District 3. And I have a guy here today. And I was just saying as we were off there, I have admired this gentleman for so long. And, and ladies and gentlemen, this is the first time that we're really getting a chance to sit down and chat with each other, and it's online. So we're just going to chop it up like we normally would if we're having a cup of coffee. Unfortunately, I didn't bring any coffee, but this is Sandeep, my man. How are you?
Good, and thank you for the kind words.
Oh no, man! I'm so excited to have you here, and just give me a little bit of give everyone a little bit of a background, because to call you a political consultant is that's kind of taken away what you actually do. How would you describe yourself?
Yeah, I would call myself a politics and public affairs consultant.
Yes.
So I moved here, just to give you the 1 minute history of Sandeep in Seattle. I moved here more than 20 years ago now to write for The Stranger, and did that for 3 years until 2005, when I left The Stranger to go work for Ron Sims when he was the King County executive, doing communications for Ron, and I did that for a couple of years.
How did you get connected with Ron?
You know, it's funny. Because back then, people forget this, but The Stranger was still kind of a semi-outlaw tabloid in that era, right? And City Hall or the courthouse, they thought those crazy kids at The Stranger, we got to stay away from. It was very. There was a real sort of sense that The Stranger was not, part of the mainstream, and we can't take it seriously and stuff. So, but Ron, to his credit, he was an early adopter on a lot of things. And I covered his the 2004 governor's race,
right,
where he ran and lost in the primary to Christine Gregoire. Mm-hmm. But he liked what I had written in The Stranger about the governor's race and was following that coverage, and reached out to me at one point and said, "Hey, I've got a job in my office. Would you consider leaving The Stranger and come work for me?" And at first I said no. I like what I'm doing, but I was turning 40 years old, a second kid on the way. I was making 40 grand a year. I remember those. Yeah. And so we came back again in a couple months, and I ended up taking the gig to be deputy communications director for Ron. And that was the first time somebody from The Stranger, scary stranger, had gone into that kind of mainstream, government service in a position like that. But all credit to Ron. He had no qualms about doing it. He liked my stuff, and he was, and I will still say I love Ron Sims. He was the best boss I ever had. I'm eternally grateful and dedicated to him for, he changed the course of my life.
One of the great gentlemen in politics in Seattle. Who was, when you were working on The Stranger, who was there?
Back then, it was still Dan Savage.
Oh, Dan Savage
was editing the paper.
I ran for the school board in 2001. People thought that was a really good idea for me to run for school board.
That's a year before I got to town.
You got those. You remember? Yeah, and of course we had the incident in New York City and the tragedy, and you're building a campaign on that. And I ran against what was the lady's name? Mary Bass.
Oh yeah,
Mary Bass was on the. She saved me from being on the Seattle School Board. I still send her royalty checks.
Well, remember that was the last time the years right after that was the last time they were closing schools.
That's right. That's right. Interesting, right? Yeah. And I remember when I ran into and Tim Traynor. I don't know if you remember Tim Traynor, who was married to Regina LaBelle.
Oh yeah.
Who worked in Greg Nicholson. And Tim is a longtime political friend of mine, and
of course,
and such a nutty character. But he was like, hey, you're going to interview with a stranger, man. I want you, man. And they load you up with all this stuff, man. You go in there, and so I went in there, and Dan Savage said the rather oily Juan Cotto, and God, I almost cried. I said, Dan, you called me oily. I'm one of the nicest guys in Seattle politics, and Dan was just like smiling at me.
Yeah,
I was like,
I'll send him a text about
that. Oh man, I was tell him I was.
Yeah,
I was so young. I was like 35, and I was 35 acting like I was 25, and I was like just mortally wounded.
The stranger, obviously it carved its reputation for being very, very blunt and direct.
It was.
And not pulling any punches. And that's how we kind of made a name for ourselves back in that era. And so I was there 3 years. I had a really good run. And the great thing about it was Dan and my boss at the time was Josh Fite.
Sure,
right? The news editor, right? And then Erica Barnett came and joined the news staff after I was there. So it was kind of that era of the stranger. And the cool thing was Dan really, let me go out and do stuff. I covered the 2004 presidential race, and the stranger gave me the money to go. I went to both conventions. I went to New Hampshire and got to write a 5,000-word story hanging out with John Kerry on the campaign trail for a day. I did a big story about Howard Dean early on that got a lot of national play. And so it was a huge opportunity to kind of go out there. There wasn't a lot of safety net to it, but they gave you a chance to kind of show what you could do.
It seemed like there was just a tremendous sense of freedom.
Yeah, so much freedom.
You get to see it, and you get to report it in a way, in a style that's completely your own.
Yeah, and it was about having your own voice or finding your own voice, and writing in a way that really kind of tested your own ability. And we were always, as you say, pushed to be creative or kind of find that extra gear in yourself as you write the story, and kind of write something that people are going to respond to. And it was just great for me. It was a great opportunity, and Ron and others really kind of noticed my voice and my stuff, and it kind of opened those doors for me.
What was your favorite story from that time?
I think I had a few I loved. I mentioned I did a story back in May of 2003, so 19 months before the presidential election, about Howard Dean, a 4,500-word kind of story where I went out to New England and New Hampshire and followed him around on the campaign trail. And that one blew up really big and became kind of the narrative of Howard Dean. And remember, he was a front runner for a while.
I remember.
Yeah, and that story helped kind of build that up. And every time I'd see him afterwards, on the campaign trail, he would never quite remember my name, but then I'd be like, "Oh, I'm Sandeep Kaushik." He's like, "Oh my God, oh, you're the guy that wrote that story." Like I'm not supposed to say this, but I love that story you wrote. And so that was a big one for me. It was big for my career. But probably the one I loved the most was the first big scoop I had in Seattle right after I got to town, a couple months after I got to town, which was that back then, remember, we had both the Times and the PI, right? Yes, right, in print newspapers, and I had the story that Frank Blethyn had told the newsroom in an off-the-record meeting that he was going to move to kill the joint operating agreement between the two papers and essentially put the PI out of business. And so I wrote that story. I think it was a big moment for the stranger because we weren't really seen as a really a established news operation back then. Sort of a big story like that everyone then checked out, and it turned out it was all true. Some people didn't believe the story at first. They were like, "Oh, he's got to be making this up." But no, it was all checked out. I had sources, it was all true. And of course, within a couple of months, Frank Bluffton did make that move to get rid of the PI, and ultimately we know what happened from there.
It's such an interesting time when, I mean, growing up, I delivered the Afternoon Times.
Yeah,
I remember that, and we had a morning paper and an afternoon paper.
Yeah,
and so different than the joint operating agreement, and all of that happened in the I was in the mid '80s where we have to have two morning papers. It was weird.
Yeah,
just because
right.
Especially
they switched over. Yeah. The old idea back in the day when they used to have afternoon papers in almost every city, right?
Did you find it challenging, or was it a challenge now to you have this freedom, you have this voice, and now you're coming into an office, a political office, working for a King County executive who is now the voice.
Yeah.
Did you find it challenging, or how were you able to kind of now
totally
morph yourself down?
Oh yeah, it was such a different environment, right? And I had been writing about politics. I'd written about the governor's race, I'd written about the presidential election, I'd written about politicians. So I kind of thought I knew how government worked. I didn't know anything until you get on the inside and you actually see the wheels turning and figure out how the sausage gets made. I thought I knew, and I think a lot of journalists think they have insight, but you don't really know. And so there was a big learning curve. Probably the first 6 months to a year that I was working there in the King County exec's office, I was just soaking it all in and kind of figuring out, how do you make stuff happen, right? How, what's the machinery of government and how does it work, and who do you got to call, and what boxes do you got to check, and I's you got to dot, and all that stuff. That was all stuff I had to learn, and it was invaluable experience for me to do those a couple years in his office, and then and then that has kind of then when I went on to do other stuff, I then left his office to go start doing campaigns. And the first campaign I did, I took a leave of absence from Ron's office, and I did the no campaign on an statewide effort to repeal the state estate tax.
Correct.
Right. In 2006. And we beat that effort. It was this right-wing guy who wanted to roll back this tax on very, 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 very large estates. Right. And we won that one. So I got the bug. And then Ron and his folks asked me, we had 2 King County parks levies on the ballot in 2007. And since I had some campaign experience now, they were like, hey, would you take a leave of absence from the office and run the campaign to pass these levies that we need for our parks? And I was like, I'd love to do it. I took a leave of absence. I intended to come back after the August primary, but in the interim, other people came to me and I got hired on some other campaigns, and then I just never ended up going back. And that's how I sort of morphed into doing campaigns and politics.
Where did you come from before Seattle?
I moved here immediately from Cleveland, where I was writing for an alt weekly in Cleveland for a couple of years. But before that, I had been in grad school working on a PhD in history that I never finished. I wrote most of my dissertation and never finished it. But and that was in New Jersey. So I lived all over the place when I was in my 20s. And, I lived in New Jersey. I lived in London for 9 months. I lived in, the DC, where I had grown up, where I met my wife. I lived in Cleveland. I spent, some months in North Carolina and Chapel Hill. So I kind of bounced around for a while.
It's so interesting because, as I told you before, when we were coming in, my wife's family is from Richmond, Virginia, from Terre Alta, West Virginia. My father-in-law, he was the chief of staff to the Republican governor, and his name's escaping me right now. But the difference in East Coast politics and West Coast politics,
totally different. Yeah.
It really does match the East Coast. You have powerful people in executive positions, and just in the West Coast, they made it clear that they were going to give strong houses and in the legislatures and in the executive positions, and the mayors are so beholden. You really have to have good relationships, whether it's in the municipal level all the way up to the state level. And it's just so interesting. What were your thoughts of West Coast politics when you started coming out here and just seeing at a lot of times just how strong, like, for example, the King County Council is, and the way that the King County executives got to dance with them almost.
Oh yeah. So I grew up on the East Coast, right? And in the DC area. And yeah, man, the politics were totally different. And just the amount of kind of process and hand holding and all that stuff that happens in Seattle or out here in the Northwest or the West Coast is just totally different. Like, so when I first moved to Seattle, I was kind of like, what is all this stuff about these neighborhood and community groups? And everybody's like, those groups exist out on the East Coast too. They just get rolled by the politicians and they want to do something. But out here, everybody's got to have a meeting and you got to have these conversations and you bring people along and you can't do stuff if there's not, and so it's a very, very different vibe from how politics worked out on the other coast. And so it took me a while to get used to it. And obviously I've grown to be, in many ways, not 100%, but in many ways, a huge fan of how we do it out here. I think it's a more, it's a flatter kind of system. It's a more egalitarian, more democratic kind of way that we do our politics here, which in a lot of ways is better, right? And the downside is sometimes it's harder to get stuff done, right, or to move the ball forward, and that can be frustrating. But a lot of times, the fact that you really do have to kind of cast a wide net and talk to lots of people and get that input and take it seriously, means what comes out at the other end of the governmental process is better. It's been shaped and molded in ways that sometimes doesn't happen in other places.
You're with Juan Cotto and Sandeep on our community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world, on Rainier, down here in 4916 Rainier Avenue South, in the heart of the Southeast Seattle area, and we're just chopping it up. We have no specific agenda. Who knows what we'll accomplish today? I remember I was in a business meeting to go from a business meeting where I was saying to myself, God, we got to begin with the end in mind.
Here we are.
Here we are, man. We
Columbia City, baby.
We can end with the beginning in mind. Gee whiz. It's interesting because the politicians that are successful here, as you know, and you work for,
I worked for a few,
you worked for you worked for one of the great ones. And it's interesting, right? Because I was a high school football coach. I coached at Franklin High School over here, and I was the head coach for 5 years at Highline High School in Burien. And you have 70% of your kids run free and reduced lunch. And these GPAs, and a lot of them don't have dads at home, and man, you're just setting the standard for them. And they're not doing their homework, and they all think they're going to play in the NFL. And I'm like, hey, no, son, you can't even speak a complete sentence, right? And this is important, man. And you become the boss. And and I'm telling you, I have some big dudes, couple Latino dudes, couple Black, couple Samoan dudes, and they see me walking around the corner and they get quiet because the boss is here. Daddy is here. And you're very, very definite in terms of what the expectations are, and there are consequences. And that's one of the things you kind of become the boss. But in Seattle politics, it didn't work that way. And and I grew up with and I worked in the King County Executive's office for Gary Locke. And who's brilliant. Gary's brilliant. I worked in and obviously I've known Ron for so long.
Totally.
And then I grew up just with tremendous admiration and as my idol growing up when I was a little kid when he ran for the Seattle City Council. As the first Black man I remember running, it was Norm Rice.
Oh yeah.
And the way they practice politics when you're a driven boss kind of guy, they really were masters of massaging all of that too. I mean, I remember when Norm had a vote to close a street, and people were like, if we're in the East Coast, man, the mayor just closes the street. Vote to close the street. Why do we have to close? But the respect for the process, and how committed they all were to it, and to a certain extent, as effective as they all were.
One of the things I really noticed that was different when I first came to Seattle was, I was like, what is it about all of this this process and this effort to get to consensus, and and I at some point decided that there's what I call a kind of communitarian culture, right, that exists in Seattle. And the way I sort of think it goes back to the roots of the city. You got a whole bunch of Scandinavians that came here on the one side, who all have a very big emphasis on social harmony and social concern, good social public facing relations in those kind of Scandinavian communities. And then you also had a real big Asian community, Japanese, and which also has a real emphasis on building social harmony, on finding sort of unity and common ground. And I think that those are the kind of strands of the political DNA that exist in our culture. That's part of that kind of old Seattle culture where, we may have to go back in the back rooms and, kind of raise our voices to kind of get there, but at the end of the day, we're all coming out the door and we're all holding hands and singing Kumbaya. And, we've got the consensus and agreement on how we're going to go forward. And that kind of spirit of collaboration and compromise is a really big part of at least the Seattle that existed when I first got here, right? It was dominant. Now, there is a new politics in Seattle that is much more adversarial.
You noticed that.
Yeah. And a lot more toxic and aggressive, and that's different. But
I want to come back to that because we're definitely going to come back to that. And I'm just kind of give everyone just a little bit of a highlight. So Ron Sims, he's King County executive. Barack Obama gets elected president of the United States. All sorts of scuttlebutt about what Ron is going to do. Ultimately takes the undersecretary position in the Department of HUD. Yeah. Is that when you left, or is that
I had already left by then? Okay. So I was there for Ron's at the end of Ron's second term, and then for his reelect to get reelected to the next term, and then he did his third term, and then left to go work at HUD in DC in the first years of the Obama administration. I left in 2005, and I think that was obviously after the 2008 election that he moved on to HUD. Yeah.
And it's really interesting in that time. I'm sure we will come back to a number.
I'm sorry, I got that. I left in 2007, and it was I started in 2005. I left in 2007. It was 2000 after the 2008 election.
Somebody's looking for me, and we will. Actually, it's a spam call. Sorry, I'm not available. Whoever's trying to sell me something. Who was I going to say? Said Daniel laughing back there. Hey man, it's us, Daniel. I'm sure there's all sorts of interesting folks looking for us. I was going to say the change from citywide council elections
to districts.
It seemed like it lowered the bar when you were running, when you were thinking about running for city council. When I was in my, after my state legislative campaign against Sharon Tomiko Santos, that was in 1998. A number of, and
not to date yourself.
Yes, not to. Please date myself. Yeah. My wife insists. Loves bringing me the AARP stuff. With the sixth grader, I tells her with the sixth grader that AAR, just throw that stuff in the trash. I get not even close.
Yeah, how dare they send me this?
But so it seemed like people were talking about Juan, we want to take a shot at the city council things or looking at city council here in Seattle. Yeah. And it was interesting because the people that were on the city council, you had people like Margaret Pagler and Jane Noland and Tom Weeks and Jim Street and Martha Cho and Jan Drago. Who was interesting. Jan's different. Yeah. Jan's interesting woman. She's still tough as nails though. When I was in the appointment process last year, I knew I was going to win, so I had that little blood ball at the beginning. So I was kind of squeezing my blood ball to promote Blood Rush Northwest. And then in the end, when they went to halftime, and Jan comes up to me, and I thought I'd really give her some good answers. I was ready to hear her feedback. She's like, I'm going to take that blood ball out your head. I'm going to give me that. She snatches the blood ball from me. Some kind of blood ball. But you had some really interesting people. Yeah. And you had some folks. I wouldn't consider them activists. I would consider them almost like statesmen, and they were a little bit senior in their careers. and people who had such a standard for the office. Then all of a sudden, when it went to districts, and tell me if I'm wrong from your perspective, it seemed like we have a different city council at play. It seems like more the barriers to entry are lower. It is far less expensive to run for city council. I know that. It's far less expensive, although there are some candidates who can make it expensive. But it is far less expensive. The number of votes needed is radically lower. And I think that it is given an opportunity to a different type of person to run for city council, and it is obvious.
I think districts were definitely changed things, right? I mean, there was definitely some change after district. I don't think that was the only factor that happened here. Look, we were talking about this sort of shift in our this kind of new, more adversarial politics that came up. But I really think the election of Shama Sawant to the council in 2013 was a huge shift. The culture of the council changed a lot. She would kind of fill the council chambers with folks that are red shirts, and they would kind of, yell at the council members who were, who they disagreed with and stuff like that. And the kind of vibe and the politics of the council started to shift in part because of those kinds of, I think there was a kind of rising younger left in the city that was not having the old, we're going to kind of hold hands and, work together and do the statesman thing. They were impatient and, angry and pushing for bigger, faster change. Right. And I'm
still trying to figure out what happened, because I felt in 1992 when I worked for Patty Murray's campaign. And I was a Western Washington coordinator.
And Year of the Woman.
The Year of the Woman.
And
so many things had happened. And Sandeep, just to let you know, I had the audacity. I met Patty Murray and Teresa Purcell under the stairways at Renton High School at the King County Democrats convention. And Patty Murray introduces herself, and Teresa Purcell is standing right there. And they said, "Look, we'd like to talk to you about a job." And I said, "Well, I'm the volunteer coordinator for the Jesse Weinberry game." I don't think so. And so they called me, and I said, "I just don't think this is going to work." And thank goodness they called me back. Thank goodness. But we'll talk more about those stories later. But it was
funny how those things.
Oh my goodness! I just can't even. I tell Teresa Purcell all the time, if you guys don't call me back, I just don't know how my life turns out. But you think about when we were young, and I was in my mid to 20s. Still feeling good today, of course, but we were the young liberal, and we had a lot of fire, but we couldn't push through anybody. And it just seems like this younger generation. I was thinking about when Joe Wynn ran for King County Council. They're like, no, they don't wait for anybody.
Oh yeah.
We are gonna take a little bit of a break here. Daniel says it's time for our profit centers to check themselves out. So we will be back on Juan on Rainier right after this.
Pearson, host of Star Time, and this is my real voice. Honest, you're hearing it on Rainier Avenue Radio .world. Should have told her you were sorry.
We here at Rainier Avenue Radio need your help to get our guy, DJ Nasty Ness, back on his feet. Ness has been a cornerstone of the Seattle music community all of his life and has hosted K-Fox Night Beat with us at Rainier Avenue Radio for over 4 years, entertaining you every Sunday night. But he's fallen ill now, fighting for his life from a hospital bed. He's suffering from pneumonia, heart attack, kidney failure, sepsis, a UTI, and is currently actually in the process of relearning how to walk. We here at Rainier Avenue Radio love our guy Ness and sincerely ask you to help him out by donating to his GoFundMe to help him get back to good health. Donate today by going to GoFundMe support Nasty Ness Rodriguez Road to Recovery. Again, that's GoFundMe support Nasty Ness Rodriguez Road to Recovery. Thank you for helping out our guy DJ Nasty Ness.
Greetings. This is your host, DJ Neftali, Rainier Avenue Radio World, the best DJ in the Seattle area. You can catch me every Monday at 8 p.m. on YouTube. Like I said, this is DJ Neftali, the best reggae in Seattle, Washington, the best radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio World. Come on, right?
Mga kaibigan, ito po si Kuya Bert Kawili.
And this is Miles Salvador from Australia.
And I'm Norb Kawili, also known as Norbcam.
Kung gusto niyo po ang latest news and events from the Philippines at yung local Filipino community, Phil-Am Radio po.
We play Filipino music and interview guests from all around the world.
And I'll keep you updated on the latest Seahawks and sports news.
Kaya always tune in, Phil-Am Radio every Tuesday, 1 to 2:30 p.m. Pacific Time on Rainier Avenue Radio World.
And in YouTube and Facebook. Salamat po.
A new law is helping people save more money on prescription drug costs. You may also be able to save with Medicare's Extra Help program. Your premium cost can be zero and your out-of-pocket expenses are low. Who should apply? Single individuals earning less than $23,000 a year or married couples earning less than $31,000 a year. Even if you don't think you qualify, you should still check out this program. Visit ssa.gov/extra help. Medicare costs are covered by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Rainier Avenue Radio World is your 24/7 digital media hub. Tune in at Rainier Avenue Radio World. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and TuneIn apps.
We are back on Juan on Rainier, the show where we are going to be talking and chopping up with political figures and community activists, and we are bringing them all in. And we have one of the all-time greats here. We have a Sandeep, and I like Ichiro. I only know him by one name, and
because you can't pronounce my last name.
That is true. And I don't. Let's not even talk about first or last names.
Yeah.
And get all these different spellings and different things, but just a person who I have admired for so long and have seen his career in Seattle area politics, and it is so great to have him here. And this is really our first opportunity where we've been able to chop it up with each other. So it's so great to see you, and thank you for taking the time to come down to the community radio station here at Rainier Avenue Radio.
Thank you for having me, Juan. It's fun. I'm, it is surprising to me that we have not had a chance to do this, in all the years previous, but I'm glad we're finally getting a chance to do it. Better late than never.
Sandeep, I was a 2-handicap golfer at one time until the kids came, and Clemente and Araceli have come into my life, and it's such a wonderful relationship. But it's amazing how things that you love, you kind of put on the back burner while you get to watch your kids and are entertained by your kids. And politics at times has been that way for me, but it is such a great connection here in Southeast and Central Seattle, District 2.
District 2.
I'm sitting here. I'm minding my own business. I'm making my bulletproof coffee. I drink the black coffee, and then I put a little pat of butter and some coconut oil in it, and it helps me through my day. And all of a sudden my phone is exploding with text messages. Hey, are you in District 2? Hey, did you see this? And I'm like trying to figure this out, and I go to the Seattle Times, and Tammy Morales says, I'm out of here.
She said she did indeed on January 6th. This is her last day. She decided to resign. I think it caught a lot of people by surprise, including a lot of her supporters, right? So, yeah.
Let's look at the arc of this, okay? So 2 years ago, she's running against ultimately Tanya Wu. And I can't remember the people that were involved in that campaign in the primary, but obviously Tanya was going to appear to be a very, very strong candidate.
Yeah.
She had a connection with a group of people who were running throughout the city, who ultimately got elected. And I think that's no secret. Bob Kettle, there was Maritza Rivera. Give me the Rob Saka,
Joy Hollinsworth,
and I understand they were even having coffees on the weekends together. Which is a very, very interesting form of politics in Seattle, and also a very, very interesting group of people because none of them had really been politically.
They were all kind of first-time candidates, and so I think they were all kind of going through this experience together for the first time. So I think they all kind of bonded over that.
And I can't remember
Hanning, who lost the race to Dan Strauss. In District 6. And,
we have the election in the primary, and I believe Tanya was close in the primary. I can't remember if she win the primary.
No, she lost the primary by fairly healthy margin, but it was really close in the general.
Yeah, it was very close.
It ended up being really close. Yeah,
and so but Tammy Morales as Shama Sawant.
Yeah,
and I don't want to combine them, but for all intents and purposes, a lot of us do. Similar support, similar type of philosophies, similar in terms of their votes on the council. Instead of now 9-0 or 8-1, it's now 7-2. But her vote totals come in later after the general had been counted. Tanya Wu was the presumptive winner that night, and I think we had her here on Rainier Avenue Radio. 3 days later, the late vote comes in, and it leans towards. I have some interesting things about that, but the bottom line issue is that Morales was able to hold off Wu for the seat. So with the election of Mosqueda to the King County Council, that opens up a citywide election, and Tanya Wu obviously having the momentum of that, and they had 8 candidates that were pulled out, including one of them that is sitting here on this conversation today.
I believe his last name is Cotto.
There
were 8. There were how many? 70 or 80 applications, but there were 8. You were one of the 8 finalists.
I was one of the 8 finalists. Yeah. And it was a fun process. It's always fun, as I tell you, when you know all the people involved. It is so much fun, and to be able to go through that. And Tanya with her machine intact, and obviously with the results that she had, ends up taking that seat, and although one candidate, if I remember, because I gave that speech, I said you have to have somebody who knows how to run a campaign, who has run successful campaigns before, and has the ability to do this. And I even threatened to all of them that I was going to run. Because I was going to see if I could scare them into voting, and they were like, "Nah, I won't forget you." And Tanya getting the seat, and it ended up being a very, very difficult summer for her.
Yes, I think it was. I think while it was close, she had lost that first campaign, and then obviously she had built bonds with some of the new incoming council members who had won their races, and so they ended up appointing her. But then it's hard. You got to jump right back in with both feet and run another campaign. Citywide, while you're now in office and governing and kind of learning the ropes as somebody who's a first time, council member, first time at City Hall kind of person. And Tanya hadn't been super involved in the mainstream municipal politics before. She'd done a lot of community stuff in the CID. So I think it was a big learning curve for her when she came into office just on the government side. And then you had to add a really hard fought campaign on top of that, and all credit to Alexis Rink, who ran against her and defeated her this November. Alexis ran a really strong campaign.
Let's go into that, because I've been arguing with a number of people who you probably know, and as I've been getting texts and phone calls. Explain to me the mechanics of the campaign. Now that I'm an old man, but I still look young.
I'm an old man too. I'm right there with you on that.
But when you think, because and I think about the mechanics of my day and raising 2 young kids and working in a position where I've got to work with political types to address an important issue in our community. I don't get the mail and all this kind of stuff, and maybe it's just because of the inside baseball player thing too. I know these folks, and I know where I stand politically and who I'm going to vote for. But it just seemed to me that Tanya had so much money. She had the support of the business community.
Yeah.
And to introduce herself to the North End communities where a race like this really is going to be the South End has gotten better. And certainly in a political year, there's going to be more people voting. But to me, you're still going to have to win this election in the North End. I just don't understand how a woman that got here 7 years ago and no one heard of her was able to get a margin that large over, quote unquote, an incumbent.
Yeah. Well, so one thing that happened is we were doing this in a presidential year, right? Which is a different election, right? We're talking about 80% turnout, right? As opposed to an off year where the turnout's maybe 50% in the general election. So you're adding a whole bunch of voters, huge chunk of voters that basically many of them have never voted in a municipal race before. They don't pay any attention to city politics. They're coming out in the presidential year to vote for, Kamala Harris, right? And so those voters are going to be looking for guidance, right? I think the stranger, and its endorsement and strong support of Alexis had a disproportionate influence in this presidential year. The stranger is always a really significant endorsement. It's probably
from a political, give me Cindy Laws, my longtime friend, South Seattle activist, a brilliant political mind. She says that stranger is 10 percentage points. Is it that much?
I think it probably is somewhere around there, maybe even a little more. So the story I tell about this is I did Jenny Durkin's race when she ran for mayor in 2017, and I remember we polled right before the primary, and maybe a month and a half before the primary, and we had Carrie Moon at that time at 2% of the vote in our poll in sixth place, something like that. Basically barely registering on the radar screen. And then right after we polled, the stranger endorsed Carrie Moon. And she ended up coming in second in the primary, with something like 17% of the vote. So, she also had some, advertising and mailers, did some other stuff to kind of, in those last few weeks to boost herself. But I would say probably at least 10 points of that gain came from the fact that she was endorsed by the stranger, probably even a little more.
Who reads the stranger now?
Well, it's still got a sizable audience. I think, it's probably not as powerful a voice as it used to be even 7, 8, 10 years ago. And I do think on the news side, it's not as good as it used to be. I'm biased. Of course, going back to my day, back in my day, we knew how to write a news.
Of course you are. We really knew how to deliver this.
Back in my day, alt weeklies were a much bigger. We were putting out 120-page, issues, print issues that were chock full of advertising. There was money for me to go fly to New York City to go to, the Republican convention, go to Boston for the, it was a different era, right?
And they're all online now, correct?
Yeah,
the strangers,
online. They do these special guides and stuff, but basically it's all online. So it's maybe a quarter the staff that existed, back in my day. It's a much smaller, leaner operation. It's different. So, but I do think, journalistically, maybe it doesn't have the same power. But when it comes to endorsements, there are still a lot of people that when it comes time to fill out that ballot, especially when they don't know the candidates or the races, they'll be like, where am I going to go? You can go, maybe I don't really trust the Seattle Times. I'm progressive. I'm going to go to the stranger, and I'm going to look at that cheat sheet that the stranger very handy publishes and vote the stranger like. So the stranger endorsement, I think, really determines who comes out in the left lane in the primary. Now, doesn't always mean those candidates are going to win a general election, as we saw a lot of the stranger endorsed candidates did not win this last year, and or for that matter in 2021 when Bruce Harrell or Ann Davison or in the city attorney's race or Sarah Nelson won their races against the stranger endorsed candidate. So I don't think the stranger has the pull anymore to by themselves pull someone over the finish line in the general election, particularly if they go out kind of way out in left field. But they still have a lot of pull. I mean, and particularly in primaries and like you said, in these districts, man, sometimes 8,000 votes gets you through a primary. It's not, the scale of the game is a lot lower, in a primary where there's 35% turnout, and there's multiple candidates, you don't need that many votes, which is also why independent expenditure campaigns have become so much more powerful too. That outside money, right? you put $10,000, $15,000 into a primary race that's crowded, and you can move 1,000 votes and probably, get your candidate through that primary, right? So the barriers to entry and the amount of money it takes to push someone forward is a lot lower than it used to be.
It's really, really interesting. As you view this in your 20s and 30s, when you really, really want to be somebody.
Yeah.
And Sandeep, you're ambitious and you're young, and I really want to be somebody. And I'm just,
I barely remember it, but yeah, I'll take your word for it.
And you get this tremendous break.
Yeah.
Here's Patty and Teresa, and they give me this tremendous break. And I'm the Western Washington coordinator, and we elect this woman to the United States Senate.
Yeah.
In the year of the woman, and I'm sitting there with Gloria Steinem telling me that I'm changing the world, and all these different people from Jenny Durkin at the time, and Ron Sims. And all these people who are about to embark in their political careers. And I'm just destined to go right along with them. And you have these opportunities, and I run for the state legislature, and all these different things happen, and then all of a sudden you become somebody, and then I go through a divorce, I get married again, I have my children and my family, and I'm noticing that although I still have the ambition, it's not as great. The voice in my head, is looking back and forth, and maybe I don't need it the way I used to.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this race in District 2, and people have talked to me about District 3. As we both know, timing is so much in politics.
Yeah.
And also having the connections. And having the ability to connect with people. But the thing is that my daughter's sitting there telling me, Daddy, I don't want you to be mayor, I don't want you to be city council member, I just want you to be my dad.
Yeah, right.
And it makes it real simple. However, I think that there are a lot of people who kind of fall in the same category as me.
Yeah.
And they're making decent money.
Mm-hmm.
They have really responsible positions in the community. And they aren't looking at public service the way that we used to 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And in this District 2 seat, it's really interesting because to find some folks, the only name I can think of, I had two names that I submitted to Maritza Rivera.
Yeah.
And I promise not to tell, but it's Gina Hall, who's the executive director of Uplift Northwest, and my good friend Blair Taylor, who I just think would be fantastic. And he's our current chair of the urban leaders in Mount Baker, right in District 2. And they look at me like I'm crazy. They're like, we're not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so part of it is that it probably isn't as much fun as it used to be, right? It's harder to get things done because we're more divided as a city. The politics has more of an edge and a toxicity to it, and a lot of people who have achieved a certain level of kind of success and established themselves in their lives are like, why would I turn around now and subject myself to going through a campaign where I'm going to get yelled at and kind of called all sorts of names and what have you. And then even if I win at the end of it, it just ramps up to another level, and people are going to denounce me every time I make a decision on this or that. And so it's gotten a lot harder. I'm involved often in recruiting candidates. I'm talking to people about this D2 seat that's going to open up and who might be good for it. And it's a lot harder than it used to be to find good people willing to kind of say, I get all the negative stuff I have to tolerate, but there's also a real opportunity to make a difference in public service. And I still think city government is the place where you can make the greatest change in affecting people's everyday lives in the city. And so but it's hard. It's hard to get people to say, I'm going to put up with all the BS.
What can we do to get it back? Yeah. What can we do to get it back to where you can do this without all of the, or is this just part of the game now?
I do think we need to work on taking the temperature down. Nobody who steps up to do public service, and these are people coming with the best of intentions. Whether you agree with them or not, or whether there's some ideological difference between you and that person, they're not deserving of being subjected to abuse. And And some of the stuff I've seen, that gets directed at people in elective office is just out of bounds. And I think we need to do a better job as a city and as a community to call that out and say, that's not appropriate and that's not acceptable. Now some people will push back and say, how dare you? You're taking away our free speech. No, you don't get to go into council chambers and just shout and shout and shout so that they can't conduct government and they have to shut down. How's that different accepting scale from what the right-wing people, those MAGA people did on January 6th? You don't get to shut down government because you're not getting your way, right? I mean, or you don't get to abuse people because you're not getting, that's just, I've got a big, be in my bonnet about that.
But I also felt that, from a public policy perspective, you touched on it when Shama Sawant presented her tax, the wealth tax, or I can't remember. It was a wealth tax.
It was the Amazon tax.
Amazon tax.
Yeah.
And to me, that was one of those intellectual conversations where, and we talk about it. It sounds good. We're going to tax the rich.
Yeah.
We're not really looking at the impacts of that. We're not, and when you go over certain levels, and we're not thinking that businesses are going to bring in check charging stations. You go to McDonald's now, you don't see kids taking your meal. You're pushing a little button that stands that these companies have the ability to do. But it was just really interesting that no city council member really lined up and said, I'm going to go against this, and they all voted with it. And to me, that was, that kind of set the stage that, hey, we're going to go ahead and press issues, and we're not going to have we're not going to have people even fight back.
Yeah. Well, there was a period, I think, in that kind of 2019, 2020, going into 2021 in Seattle where, I think because of Trump and COVID and because of the very real, outrage over the George Floyd murder. I think that we had a moment in Seattle where things got a little, I've said this before, kind of semi-hysterical, right? And it wasn't possible to have a conversation, or people, if you just piped up to push back on anything, you got your head chopped off, right? So everybody just shut up and kind of went along with some of the loudest voices who were pushing some things that probably weren't in the best interest of the city or communities, including communities like this one. A lot of it was being done in the name of communities like this one without anybody actually talking to folks in the community to figure out what they actually wanted. So there was a period there in Seattle where I think it was really hard to voice some dissent about some of the agendas that were being pushed by folks on the on the farther left, like Shama. But I do think that period's passed, right? I mean, there was a backlash. We did have a real reckoning in the 21 and 23 elections. And now I think, there are still deep divides and big differences. But we got to try to talk across those and figure out how to solve problems and get stuff done. And there are still places where, whether you're, Alexis Rink or Tammy Morales for that matter, or Sarah Nelson, there's still a lot of common ground. We're all some color of blue in the city of Seattle, right?
That's the way it would seem. What are you hearing about District 2? What's going to happen? How's the process going to happen? How many, do you have an idea how many people are going to throw their names in the hat? And how is the city council this time going to do this at a district level?
Yeah, I think they announced the process for it yesterday. And so Tammy's going to resign on January 6th. There's 21 days. I think, it'll be similar to the process that you were participated in, Juan. I think every council member will get an opportunity to nominate one, candidate, right, out of the people that express interest. I think they're opening it up on January 2nd for people that are going to express their desire to get the appointment, and then it's going to close on the 7th or something like that. And then out of that pool of people, every council member will get an opportunity to nominate one finalist, and then there'll be some kind of public meeting where you get to hear from them. And then I think it's by the 27th of January, the council will vote and decide which of those finalists they're going to appoint to the seat. And then again, that person's going to have to run again in November. So yeah, it's going to be, it'll be, kind of pretty conventional process, I think. I think it's too early to tell how many people are going to step up and throw their names in. There are names being thrown out there. I don't want to out anybody yet.
But let me ask you this, because this to me is a question. She was going to have to run a third time anyways. Why doesn't Tanya Wu throw her name in there?
Well, for the appointment, I think I do think there was a lot of pushback after she lost, even though it was a close race. She lost to Tammy and then got the appointment in the immediate aftermath of that. But then to go and lose again, right? And she lost pretty big. Alexis beat her pretty handily in this election. So I do think, a lot of voters, and I think some of the council members were going to be like, it's just, it's sort of sticking giving the democratic process a finger to kind of turn around and appoint the person who's now lost twice, in these elections in the immediate aftermath of that. So I don't think the appointment of Tanya would be really realistic, even if I don't have any sense that she's going to seek it, but even if she did, I think it would, a lot of voters would not take kindly to that.
Conventional wisdom said that it was going to be very, very difficult for a progressive to win citywide. Teresa Mosqueda, who has an amazing ability to appear moderate at times, was able to win. And I consider Teresa Mosqueda just a first rank progressive. And I think she would agree with that. Although
she's a strong progressive for sure. Yeah.
Then you have, but this election of Alexis Mercedes Rink, I think, surprised so many of us, and she was clearly outspent, and she was able to get
I don't know that she was outspent actually. There was a lot of first of all, again, we were talking a presidential year electorate with a much bigger electorate that we had to deal with, and so. And so the amount of money that actually came into this race compared to the size of the electorate was a lot smaller this year. And on the kind of independent expenditure side in favor of Tanya, the amount of money that got spent was not actually that much. I think it was about $120,000. So there was more money that came in for Alexis. SEIU alone put in $100,000. So I think what we saw was labor come back into, organized labor come back into this race in a much bigger way, saying, we don't like some of the things the new council did, so we're going to spend for Alexis. So, it wasn't, we weren't seeing the kind of, business community spending that we saw in the 2023 races. We saw much more labor spending for Alexis in this race. So I do think the money shifted, right, in a more left direction in this election. That had something to do with it, but I also think it was just neither side had really enough money to really break through in a year where there's a presidential election and all these people voting and so much other noise out there that again, people just kind of then go back to, I'll go look and just who's the stranger saying I should vote for.
Is Sarah Nelson in trouble?
I think she's got a real race on her hands. I think it's going to be a battle for sure. No secret that there are folks on the left progressive side that are really gunning for her. And I think it's shaping up to be a kind of classic, business versus labor and progressive kind of battle over her reelection and that seat. And, we'll see what happens. I think she's going to fight hard. She's going to have a strong base of support, and going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Who's going to take on Alexis Mercedes? I'm getting the message from Daniel Bellis that it's time for us to go for break. So that's what we will do, because Daniel Bellis is the one who runs this program. Thank you, Daniel. We will come back and we will talk about 2025 on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
You're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Check us out on social media. Facebook and Instagram, Rainier Avenue Radio.world, and on Twitter, Rainier Ave Radio.
Love food? Here's some storage tips to keep it fresh longer. Store cut fruits and vegetables in the fridge. Place in reusable containers. Keep bread in the freezer for longer storage. 40% of food in the U.S. goes uneaten. Save money, save food, save the planet. Visit Seattle Public Utilities for more tips.
What's going on, world? It's your boy OG Mambo.
And your guy D Money. Join us along with Pint Size Patron and ID Yourself
Here on Fresh Juice at Rainier Avenue Radio.
every Wednesday hump day from 9 to 11 Pacific.
Get exclusive interviews from your favorite artists, all the hottest music, and updates on what we got going on in the world.
That's every Wednesday, 9 to 11 p.m. on Seattle's Rainier Avenue Radio.
1, 2, get down.
What's up, big and little homies? This is Masvita Maraire, host of Seattle Sports Weekly on Rainier Avenue Radio.world, your one-stop shop for Seattle sports. We cover preps, we cover college, we cover pro, we cover it all. Huskies, Mariners, Seahawks, Garfield, South, Roosevelt, Petro, King County. This is where you want to listen to for all the sports that's happening in Seattle. Seattle Sports Weekly on Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
This is an important message about coronavirus. With coronavirus still spreading, those who are most likely to get seriously ill must take extra precautions. You are at a higher risk for getting seriously ill if you are over 65 or if you have any serious underlying medical conditions, like heart disease, chronic lung disease, like asthma, diabetes, or if you're undergoing cancer treatment. If you're at a higher risk for getting seriously ill, it's essential you take extra care to protect yourself. Stay home, avoid close contact with others, wash your hands frequently with soap and water for 20 seconds, disinfect frequently touched objects like doorknobs and light switches. The choices you make are critical, and their impact is significant.
Rainier Avenue Radio, your community radio station will provide you with more information. Rainier Avenue Radio.
I have explained it before on WIAA Primetime. WIAA Primetime is the show that we do with Mick Hoffman, who's the executive director of the Washington Interscholastic Activities Association. And we talk about high school athletics in the state of Washington. We do a show Tuesdays at 3 o'clock where it is live, and it's a very, very well received show, and we really get into the issues that our children are dealing with. But having said that, and I encourage you to listen to that show if you get a chance, but having said that, when I hear, is that Tony who does that kind of a Rainier Avenue Radio? Trying to get my voice down that low. Your community radio station. I really like that, Daniel. I really like that. I like Tony's. I also love Tony B's copying of the motorcycle Rainier Avenue Radio. Tony's so creative and such a character. Stopped in here a few moments ago. Always good to see the there it is. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like he multi-tracked that. Did he multi-track that? Kind of like I could see Tony acting like Prince, sitting there and singing it in different harmonies. So it sounds like about 7 different people are singing, but that's just him in 7 different of his tones. But I'm going to ask him about that when I see him. Sandeep, a man who just is has been so involved in politics here and so influential over the last 2 decades. And you are hearing one of the first conversations I have been able to sit down and chop it up with him. And as I told him, I've had tremendous admiration for the work that he's done here in the Seattle, Puget Sound area. And he supported so many different candidates, as he alluded to, ran Mayor Durkin's campaign in 2017. And I think I was a supporter of Mayor Durkin, a long time Catholic family and relationships with her, and wish that would have turned out a little bit differently.
Yeah. It was a hard time to be mayor, man. Going through all of that stuff, COVID and all that stuff that happened. It was what it was. But
we were the 37 district Democrats, and
Mayor Durkin was going for one of the endorsements there, and a person who was supposed to speak for her somehow got talked out of it. So they said, Juan, will you go say a few words on behalf of Jenny Durkin? And so they said, Juan's come up to talk for Mayor for Jenny Durkin. You have 60 seconds. And people were yelling, Juan for mayor, Juan for mayor. And someone, my good friend Jeannie Legault said, no, we love him. But it just seems like when you're in that position, just people just automatically, they just want to drag you down.
Well, it's hard. There's definitely the downside of public life, and there's something about being mayor too, I think, that's different from, say, being elected to Congress or elected to the U.S. Senate or a position like that, or governor, or, one of those statewide offices, which feel like there's a distance between your average voter and, say, Senator Patty Murray, right? Whereas you're the mayor, people kind of feel like the mayor's one part of my community, my neighbor. And so sometimes they feel like they can be a little more direct and in their face about, the mayor's race. So sometimes in mayor's races, stuff can get pretty heated and pretty petty. And, some of the pushback you get from voters just and comments that are directed at mayors are just on a different level than you see kind of with, not that it doesn't happen ever with other politicians, but there's just more of it, I think. And people feel freer to which can be good, right? To kind of, comment and give input, but also sometimes on the negative side, it can be
it's so interesting you bring that up. Denzel Washington was talking to one of the Wayans brothers, and he was saying they had some fans that saw them, and they were, kind of jocular and shaking hands and high fiving the Wayans brothers, and they saw Denzel and they had this reverence for him, and he pulled them aside and said, "You know what the difference is between you and me? They to watch you guys, they just go to their TV set and they pop on the TV, sit down in their chair, and they get to watch you for 60 minutes, show your talent. For me, they've got to put on a nice pair of clothes. They got to put on a jacket. They have to get in their car and drive to the theater. They've got to pay $25, get some popcorn to see me." And it just seems like, you're right. It's really interesting because, Bruce, or I should say Mayor Harrell. Myself in that one. We'll edit that. Mayor Durkin, Mayor McGinn, they are just right there. I mean, you see them in the community. You see them on television one night. You're walking down Rainier Avenue, and they're in the grocery store. You see them at the grocery store.
Give them a piece of your mind.
And people do.
People
do here.
People definitely do. Oh, they do.
Let's go into the just briefly. We'll finish up talking about the national stuff. Obviously, we live in a bubble here in the Pacific Northwest. Sandeep, when I was driving, I took my son Clemente to James Madison University, where his mother Sarah graduated from. JMU, and we drove from Deep Creek, Maryland, to James Madison University, and it really dawned on me as I saw
and gold,
these,
right?
the purple and gold, the Dukes, beautiful campus.
I've never been there. Is it? I started at University of Virginia,
UVA.
Transferred out, but so I'm kind of familiar with those parts anyway.
But as I was driving through, and living here in Seattle, and you drive north, south, I-90, we go to all these baseball tournaments. You don't see any Trump signs. And go over to Eastern Washington, you see them, but certainly in the West, here in our little bubble. Boy, I tell you, driving across the country, I thought to myself, boy, this is going to be a little closer than I think it is. You saw no Harris signs, Trump everywhere, and it just really speaks to the command that this man has. He's got a command on a certain element of the electorate, and he is president again. I mean, in one of the as much to our chagrin, and I said this to some friends the other night, and they were a little frustrated by it, but one of the most remarkable political feats of our time.
Yeah, I wasn't super surprised by the election results. I mean, it was obviously all the polling had it kind of too close to call, but I was telling people in the weeks before the election, if you put a gun to my head, I bet you Trump wins this. And I do think that, I'm a Democrat and I'm a Democratic political activist, but or political hack, but
you and me both.
Yeah, right. But I'm also been very willing to be public, and I do think the Democratic Party has some soul searching to do here, and there is a significant erosion of particularly non-college educated voters, particularly men, black and brown men from the Democratic Party. And this started before inflation, before this, there was evidence of it in the 2020 election, even though it got kind of papered over because Biden won, right? But there were some clear signs that some things were starting to shift. And if you look at the election results from Seattle, even though we did not have the big red shift that we had around the country here in Washington State or in Seattle overall, in communities like here down in Southeast Seattle, you saw significant movements towards Trump in the vote. Now it's still a small percentage of the overall vote. Most people are voting for Kamala Harris, of course, but those movements for political, consultants like me are really significant. That's a red flag that like the party is not, maybe it's talking at, working class people and not talking to them enough, right? And not listening enough, to what their concerns are, whether it's the price of eggs or, how we're handling the border and immigration or, any number of other things in the kind of quote unquote, woke bucket, which I think for a lot of people of color, that woke stuff actually counterintuitively reads as pretty white, right? The kind of upscale white progressive stuff. Like, yeah. And they're like, well, wait a minute, I just want you to govern the country and deal with inflation and rather than trying to preach to me all day about this or that.
And let's look at here in Washington State. Okay, so we have a new governor.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, and I know this gentleman very well. He has an amazing ability to get things done, but in a legal sense. Okay, and I know this, and I joke with him. We have a good relationship, and he went to Blanchette High School. I went to O'Day High School, and we and a lot of his family did. And I said, well, you weren't as smart as your cousins and your older brothers to get into our school. Yeah. And we climb on each other a little bit.
You were in the better Catholic high school.
Thank you. Yes, he couldn't handle.
I'm taking your word for
it. Couldn't handle going to the school.
I'm not taking a side
with just boys, and he had to go up there to Blanchette to the north end. Didn't want to come down to the city.
Yeah.
But obviously an incredibly intelligent individual. Does he have the ability to do what he did from a legal perspective? I mean, just phenomenal. He's a phenomenal attorney.
Yeah.
Is he going to be able to do this as a legislative leader? And we're really the department, the head of all government in Washington State.
Yeah.
It's going to be so different.
Well, it's obviously a big change going from attorney general to being a governor, right? And it's a different sort of set of things that you're going to deal with. And obviously, you're dealing with all these legislators now in a way that's much more direct than when you were as AG, where you're basically the government's lawyer, right? Or and the people's lawyer for that matter. But that said, Bob is a experienced, talented, politician, right? Yes, he's a great lawyer, but he's also a really good politician. And so I think the opportunity is there and the skill set is there to be a really effective, successful governor. Obviously time will tell, and there's going to be, he's coming in and already there's some, storm clouds on the horizon. They got a big, significant budget deficit, even though spending has gone up. And are they going to do new taxes? How is that going to land with voters or with some of the constituencies? And, there's a lot of talk of revenue coming out of this session because of, in part because of the success that we had defeating these conservative ballot measures and anti-tax ballot measures.
Correct.
So that revenue conversation is going to happen, but I'm already hearing folks in the tech community at the Amazons and Microsofts are like, you're going to add more taxes on us. We're not going to, they're already getting kind of spun up about that. So That's all going to be on Governor-elect Ferguson's plate in a few weeks.
Did you find it surprising that one of the first things he does is he puts together, I think it's a committee or a task force. We're going to fight the Project 2025.
Yeah.
And I'm like, number one, where Washington State is. I mean, is that necessary? I mean, we have the governor, both houses of the legislature. With the issues that we have in regards to crime, certainly in the city, and the issues that we have in regards to affordable housing and the homeless, you really need to go there first.
Well, I will say this. I think in Trump 1.0, when he got elected in 2016, there was a period when if you're a Democratic politician in a blue state like Washington, all you really needed to do was kind of be like, I'm part of the resistance and I'm taking on Trump and I'm not letting, and that was sort of the mood, right. Among blue state voters is we just want our politicians to stand strong for us and to be really vocal of standing up to this guy who, everybody kind of thought it was a fluke that he got elected in the first place and he's not fit for office. But he got reelected this time. He won every swing state. The Republicans control both houses of Congress, not by big margins, but they control both houses. So I think the vibe is a little different this time around. And while I think there's going to be a lot of provocations from the Trump administration for whether you're Governor Ferguson or Attorney General Nick Brown, whose campaign I worked on, they're going to have a lot on their plate handling that stuff with the Trump administration. I think there's going to be a lot of desire from voters for them to stand up for our values and for our laws and for our way of doing things in Washington. I don't think that's going to be enough, right? I think that there also, there's also other big problems we have here in the state that it's not Trump's fault that we got a homelessness problem. It's not, or that we have issues around, public safety or crime or, street disorder or what have you. And so I think there's going to be more expectations for our elected leaders, whether in Olympia or Seattle. Voters want, my sense is voters are a little impatient right now. They see these problems get worse and they want to see them get better. And they want some action from that's why you're elected to this office. Yeah, take on Trump. We want you to do that, but it can't be all you're doing if you're ignoring the stuff that's happening on my street or in my community.
For those of us that don't know Nick Brown.
Yeah.
Tell us about Nick Brown.
I'm a huge Nick Brown fan. Enormous talent.
You're on the transition committee.
I'm on the payroll during the transition. There's a transition committee. I'm not on the, of outside folks that he has asked of stakeholders. But I am part of the transition. I'm just helping out on the communication side because I did that during the campaign, and so I'm.
Very, very handsome young fellow.
He is a handsome,
good-looking dude. Good-looking dude.
I shouldn't say this publicly because I'm putting too much weight and expectation on those shoulders of his. But I really see a lot of Obama level talent in Nick Brown. Right. Nick is a guy who grew up in down in Pierce County. His parents were, just ordinary family. He joined the military. He became a lawyer, Harvard Law School, became a military JAG lawyer for 4 years, then became the attorney for Governor Jay Inslee. In between, he did a stint on the TV show Survivor because he is
and Tom Cruise played him in the.
And then was the U.S. attorney under Biden, and then now is our attorney general. And so, yeah, Nick is handsome and personable and charismatic. All of those things are true, but he's also like thoughtful, smart, just has a real good head on his shoulders, common sense kind of dude. I think the world of Nick. I think the sky's the limit for him in terms of his future and his political ambitions. And it's just been a pleasure to get to know him and work with him on this campaign.
Bob is so aggressive. Bob is so aggressive, pursuing the Trump administration and what he
99
lawsuits, and what did he win them all or 99 out of 101?
I think all but two. Yeah.
Are we going to see a little bit different tenor, or do we?
Nick's been asked this a lot, and what he says is, "Hey, look, I'm not looking to to pick a fight with the Trump administration. I'm not out there trying to like, generate headlines for the sake of generating headlines and, and go into litigation in step one. That said, my job as Attorney General is to defend the laws of Washington State and to stand up for our values. If I see the Trump administration violating those laws or really egregiously violating our values, I will act, right? I'm not looking for the fight, but I'm not gonna run away from it either. So I do think it's a little bit more of a nuanced tone to it. I will say this, from conversations with Nick, when the Trumpies first came in the last time, they didn't really know what they were doing. So some of the things they tried to do, like the Muslim ban stuff, it's not like they even had a lawyer look at these laws before they filed them. So they were full of legal errors and constitutional issues that allowed somebody like Bob Ferguson, who is a really talented attorney, and his team to look at that and say, this is, unconstitutional, illegal, and we got a really strong case here and make that case. Now, as Nick has said, if there are going to be things the Trump administration does that we're not going to like in Washington State, but they may be perfectly legal and constitutional. And if that's the case, then, elections have consequences. They got elected. They have the right to do that. Now, if they come in here and they're exceeding their mandate or violating the law or violating our laws, I think you will see Nick stand really strong on that stuff. So I think it's going to be something where he's going to do it on like he said to me, whether you're Donald Trump or anybody else, my job is to uphold the law, and I'm going to do it the same regardless. Right?
Sandeep, I'm still a candidate for my master's degree in public administration at the University of Washington, at the Evans School. I went to the Graduate School of Public Affairs. Still need to turn in a degree project or whatever they call that thing.
Thesis.
Thesis.
Yeah, whatever.
Whatever.
Yeah,
something. Right? I mean, what did Russell Crowe say? You're taking acting classes, but you start doing the work, and then you learn how to do it. And now I got to go back and do that. Well, but I need to do that. But the thing is that I think that I have an understanding of these issues more than the normal voter. The initiatives seem to be so doggone complicated. I had to read those things over and over and over again, and I had to sit down with my wife. And I like to get my ballot, and I like to just check everything off. Man, I had to read that sucker to make sure that I knew what the heck I was voting for and how I was voting for, make sure it was the right decision for me to vote for. There was a city council member who you mentioned earlier, and she made a lot of noise one time. She said, "I have no friends who are Republicans." I have a ton of friends who are Republicans, and certainly with the schools that my children attend, and my sons at O'Day and St. Joe's, and my college roommate, big time Republicans. And one of the moms, who's a very conservative mom, came to me, and she was talking about a couple of the different issues around long-term care and everything. She said, something the voters never even want. It's not what you think it is, and the voters never even got a clear understanding of it. It seemed like there was a lot of frustration and tension. It's almost as you worked on these initiatives.
Well, there's some confusion, of course. These are complicated matters. They get boiled down to the information on your ballot, and if you're not paying a whole lot of attention, you're going to have to go and look and find information about them. And so was there some confusion? Absolutely. But I don't think that was determinative. And I should say here, I was part of Defend Washington, which was a coalition that came together to oppose all four of the Haywood initiatives as a slate. We won we defeated the three main ones and lost by a narrow margin, 2066, the natural gas one. But I think at the end of the day, voters heard we raised $35 million on our side between the four measures.
That's something.
That's serious money by any measure. We got our message out there, but they did too, right? I mean, they had a simple message: vote yes, pay less, right? I mean, basically, like selling an anti-tax measure is kind of the lowest hanging fruit in politics, right? All you got to say is vote yes, pay less, and which is what they said over and over. So voters heard that, and for the most part got what the debate was about. But we live in a blue state, and people don't want to see hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in cuts to key programs or to funding for schools or for clean air and water programs or the transportation system or care for vulnerable people and seniors, right? And at the end of the day, they said, I'm willing to vote these down, even though I may pay a little bit more because of it. First of all, some of them, like the capital gains tax, is only paid by extremely wealthy people. You know, you got to make more than $262,000 in profits on the sale of stocks and bonds in a given year to even pay $1 of tax.
Yeah,
So
I was a few dollars off.
Yeah,
I missed out.
You should be so lucky that you get to pay the capital gains tax. But nonetheless, like people, I don't think people are dumb or confused, overall, or dumb or confused or misunderstood what was going on with those. I think they looked them over, they did their homework, and they made their decision. And we, on 3 of them, we won, going away.
David Updegrove.
Yeah.
And I have to give Hillary Franz a lot of credit.
Yeah.
Because who cared about the Commissioner of Public Lands before her?
Yeah.
I mean, she's going to go down as a historical figure for those who study this. I mean, if you study the Commissioner of Public Lands, she certainly was able to build coalitions across both sides of the aisle, and she was able to, I think, really raise the just the perception of what that office actually did.
Yeah.
No one. I remember when Mike Lowry was driving around, and after he was running for Commissioner of Public Lands. I think Greg Nichols ran for it too one time.
But remember Doug Sutherland?
Doug Sutherland. Yeah.
And
it's kind of like, but Hillary,
and then Peter Goldmark was in there for a while. Yeah.
I mean, you hate to see established people kind of. But she certainly raised a profile of that position, and she had people, and obviously it became quite of a contested race, and Dave Updegrove certainly was able to pull it off against an interesting the perception of Jamie Herrera Butler.
Yeah.
I got that name right.
Republican congressman, former Republican congressman,
who voted against Trump.
Yeah. Well, she voted to impeach Trump, right? Which was her big, and all credit to her for standing up against a lot of pressure in her party and from others to say, no, the right thing to do is to take this impeachment vote. She did that.
How big a victory was that for the environmentalists?
Huge victory. Yeah. So that was another race that I did. I was the lead for Dave in that race. And it was a hard race for us, right? We had a crowded Democratic side on the primary. There were only 2 Republicans running. There were 5 Democrats, and we barely made it through the primary. At the end of the day, we had to go to hand recount. We won it by 49 votes to get through the primary. And then there was more than $1 million that between the timber industry and Republican money that got spent on the independent expenditure side for Jamie in the general election. So we got outspent about 4-1 in the general election race when you add all the money up. And so it was challenging and a great win for Dave. I will say this, Jamie I give her all the credit in the world for taking that very difficult impeachment vote. She lost her seat over it, basically, down in Southwest Washington. So kudos to her for that. It was the right thing to do. That said, her environmental record in Congress was really bad. I mean, like she is not a great, there's a big difference between her and Dave on environmental issues. So I was really glad that we were able to win that race. It
has been such a pleasure to sit and chat with you.
Yeah.
And hopefully this will not be the last time.
Real quick, I just want to throw out, I do a podcast about municipal politics.
Absolutely.
Who doesn't? It's called Seattle Nice. And
Let's do it.
If your listeners don't know and you want to hear a kind of argument across the left divide about Seattle politics, check out Seattle Nice.
Seattle Nice.
Yeah.
We will make sure that we highlight that on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio. Sandeep, so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Juan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And we will see you next. I will see you next time on Juan on Rainier and also on WIAA Primetime. Signing off, and thank you, Daniel B. Easy money, fresh juice.